All right, so we are live from Telespark in the Body Worlds exhibit here. Now, of course, with us being temporarily closed to the public, we can't have anybody in to see it. So we thought, let's bring this exhibit to you. So my name is Zack. I'm the Director of Youth Education here at Spark. And by trade, my background's in zoology. So I'm always happy to talk about animals and provide random animal facts. And today, we're looking to you to provide us some questions. So we're going to go through a few of the different animals that we have here in Body Worlds and ask you to submit some questions. So we're going to be talking about the giraffe, the ostrich, sharks, and if we have time, see what else we can fit in. And we'll just ask you to submit them there on your feed and whatever you're connected with, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. Also, you might notice that as we're moving around and filming here, we're doing our best, our small group that's in here shooting, to maintain social distance from one another. And so you might occasionally see us in the shoot as we're moving around and getting this footage. So, with that in mind, do we have a question about giraffes from our audience?
Hey, Zach, we do. We have a question from Paige and Emily from Didsbury. They ask, what are the tops of the giraffe's head called?
That's a great question, Paige and Emily. If you look at the top of that giraffe's head there, they have those weird looking horn things that are actually not horns at all. Those are called ossicones, and what they are is they are bony growths on the top of the skull. So it's basically the skull expanding outwards. They're covered with skin and hair just like the rest of the skull, and they work for battling one another. So males will especially use them to get their necks up against each other and push against each other, behavior called necking, which is very different than human necking. And they'll use their heads to club each other and fight each other over potential mates. So horns are a little bit different. They have a little bit of bone inside, and they're covered with keratin, which is the same stuff that your nails and hair are made of. So yeah, it's a great question. Do we have another question?
Yep.
One on Instagram.
Yeah.
Mia and Bennett would like to know, what do they eat and how tall do they get?
Mia and Bennett. So giraffes are the tallest living animal on the planet. They can reach almost 20 feet tall. 18 is a little bit normal for a big male. That's pretty big. That's like 3 of me stacked on top of each other. Of course, you can see me standing next to this guy, so you get an idea of how tall they are. So they are eating plants, and they're eating the tallest plants. So big trees, things like acacia trees in Africa are some of the biggest ones that only the giraffes have access to because they're so tall. And it's interesting, because of that, they can actually be a little bit picky with the trees that they're choosing to eat. And acacia trees, if you've ever seen them, they have thorns that are about like 2 inches, like 10 centimeters long, and they are massive. And they would really hurt. So luckily, giraffes have really thick saliva, spit, and their tongue and cheeks are very, very thick to be able to protect them from those sharp, spiny plants. And that's mostly what they eat, are those big, tall trees. That's a great question.
We have another one here from Autumn, age 6 in Lethbridge. Autumn asks, why do giraffes have long necks?
That's a great question, Autumn. And it actually kind of relates to the previous question, right? Because in the African savanna, there's so many different animals. There's different antelopes and zebras and ostriches, which we'll talk about next. And all these different animals that are eating plant material. So giraffes, over many, many, many years, grew their necks really long because that way no other animal has access to the tall, tall trees that they're eating. So they're eating the tallest trees. Of course, it does make their life tricky when they need to go for a drink, right? Because basically, if you've ever seen a giraffe drinking, they'll like spread their legs super wide and they'll duck their head down. And it can be a pretty big challenge if you're a giraffe and you have that big, long neck. So that's a great question.
Awesome. We have one from Jenna here. Jenna asks, how long is a giraffe's tongue?
Oh, giraffe tongues are actually one of my favorite things about giraffes. You can't see it on this one here, but their tongue is about 18 inches long, so about that long. And what's really interesting about it is a word in science that we call prehensile. So prehensile means it works like a hand, so they can grab onto tree branches, gives them that extra little bit of reach, pull them off and take them into the mouth. And kind of like a monkey's tail or an elephant's trunk. It kind of works the same way, but imagine that with your tongue. The other handy thing about a tongue that long is they can pick their nose with their tongue, right? Fun fact. It's also purple, so that it doesn't get sunburned in the hot African sun. So Great question.
I have two on Instagram.
Sure.
Felipe would like to know, how do you know the difference between a female and male giraffe? And we also had a question on how much do they eat?
So great question. So in terms of the male, and the question was males and females, how do we tell the difference between them? You know what? Just looking at them from far away, you probably wouldn't notice. They look pretty similar in a lot of ways. Males do tend to be bigger. Right, so there'll be a couple of feet taller maybe, and their heads tend to be a little bit bumpier because of the battles that they're having with each other. And you can always look underneath a giraffe too, because there's always those hints there as well if you catch my drift. So in terms of how much they eat, it does vary animal to animal, but they'll spend pretty much like all day chowing down on those leaves. Like I know with animals in zoos, they'll give them like an entire bale of specialized hay every morning, and then give them like things to browse on, so different branches that they can strip the branches off and the leaves off of as well. So it gives you an idea of how much they eat. Not as much as something like an elephant, for sure.
Great. We have a question here from Logan, age 5. Logan asks, how many bones do giraffes have?
You know what? Giraffes have, that's a great question. Giraffes have pretty much the same number of bones in their body as we do in ours. So mammals, by and large, have a pretty similar set amount of bone structures, right? And that's one of the ways that we know we're related to each other, right? And that's amazing because you can see their bones are obviously much different shape and much bigger than ours. Like this right here is basically their arm bone, right? So that's this bone right here in me, and theirs is a lot bigger than mine is, right? And that's because obviously they're a much bigger animal. One of the greatest things to look at in terms of the bones with giraffes is their neck, because they have that big long neck, and I mean, how big is my neck? It's like that big, right? But I have the same number of bones in my neck, 7, that giraffes do in theirs. It's just, if you feel the back of your neck, you'll feel little bumps. Those are your neck bones. They're the little kind of backs of those. And with a giraffe, each of theirs is about the size of a big old brick. So it means that their necks aren't very bendy, just because 7 bones means you have 7 joints. So there's not a huge amount of opportunity for them to bend their necks in weird ways. But yeah, they have the same number more or less than we do. So that's a great question.
Speaking of bones, we have an Instagram question asking if they have elbows.
Yeah, giraffes do have elbows, but they don't quite work the same way. And it's kind of interesting because giraffes and many animals out there are actually walking on their tippy toes. It doesn't quite look like it, but their bones, again, have that different shape than us. So if you look right up here, this will be basically a giraffe's arm right here. So the top bone, that's their humerus. So that's the top part of the bone. Down here, the radius and the ulna, these 2 bones. And then this right here is actually their metacarpal. So that's these bones right here. But you can see ours are like that, right? Theirs are like that. That's how they can get that really big size. And then all like their digits, they have only 2 toes, right? So they've shrunk down a lot of their bones. Like cows, like goats, they're called the even-toed ungulates. They shrunk it down, but they have those same kind of basic structure. But so yes, they do have an elbow. It's right there, just quite a bit different than ours. That's a great question.
We have one from Natasha. How tall is a giraffe on average?
On average, so you're looking about 16 to 18 feet. They can get bigger, they can be smaller. Obviously, when they're born, they're about my height, right? And they grow. But just like us, like, you know, humans can vary in size from under 5 feet to like 7 feet, right? So there can be quite a wide range there. But giraffes are usually kind of in that like 16 to 18 feet kind of range. So we have time for one more question with our giraffes. So let's fire away.
This one comes from Amy. How long are giraffe legs? And Nolan, age 5.
Thank you, Nolan. That is a great question. So, I mean, obviously it depends if it's a baby or it's a grown-up. But, I mean, their legs, this one's a little bit up on a platform. But if you compare, like if I were to come up on that platform, they'd actually be about as tall as me, right? So about 6 feet and a little bit more tall. So that's a big leg. Now, what you can imagine is that's how tall the mom's legs are. When baby giraffes are born, that's how they start their entry to the world. They fall bloop, right out of mom onto the ground. Imagine that head start in life. So it's certainly a shock to the system. So we are going to move on to our next animals, but you know, keep these great questions coming. We're going to move to the ostrich and talk a little bit about that, because obviously the giraffe is the tallest animal in the world. So let's talk about the tallest bird, the biggest bird, as a matter of fact, in the world, and that is our ostrich. So one thing I really want to point out with this ostrich here that's really cool is you can see its feathers. The feathers almost look like fur, so they don't work the same way that most birds' feathers do. If you've ever found a feather on the ground and you've zipped it and unzipped it, they have special little things that allow their feathers to create one kind of continuous surface to allow them to fly. Of course, ostriches, they don't fly, so they don't need them to zip together, and they can make them fluffy to help kind of protect them from the elements. So do we have any questions for ostriches?
Yeah, we have one here from Kaylee. Kaylee asks, why are ostriches' feet shaped like that?
Oh yeah, that's actually one of my favorite things to talk about, because I love dinosaurs, and ostrich feet always remind me of dinosaur feet when you look at them. And if you look at them, how many toes do you see there? You only see 2, right? I mean, we have 5 toes, right? Many birds will have 3 and then 1 in the back, but like these guys only have 2. And the reason for that is because it helps them run faster. So the less toes they have means there's less things touching the ground, which means there's less things kind of creating friction, which might slow them down when they run. And these guys, these ostriches, that's the best way they can get away from any sort of predator. They can run speeds of up to 70 kilometers per hour, which is pretty darn fast, right? And so having those feet that look like that help them to be really great runners.
We have quite a few questions coming up on Instagram. So a couple of them are, why do they have wings? How long do they live? And how big are their eggs?
Okay, so I'll tackle them. So the first one was, why do they have wings if they're a flightless bird? And that's because all birds' ancestors had wings, right? So birds came from dinosaurs, so their arms kind of changed into wings over many, many millions of years. And because birds all come from that, they all have wings. So it's not like they can just grow back hands, right? But what they do is they'll make trade-offs. So because they're oh, I lost my bottle. I'm sorry. The wings there, they're still going to need them for doing things like display, showing off. I mean, it's basically like the bird's arms. So they're not going to lose them. Now, in terms of how long they live, birds live actually quite a bit longer than their mammal companions. So things like the giraffe over there, they'll live like 15, 20 years. I mean, they can live longer than that, but that's kind of average. Ostriches can live up to like 40, right? I mean, there's some birds like parrots that can even live into their hundreds. So parrots can be tricky pets to own because they often outlive their owners. And the last question was, how big is an ostrich egg? So ostrich eggs are the biggest egg of all the birds. Of course, it makes sense. Big bird, big egg. They can fit about 24 chicken eggs worth in one ostrich egg, which means you're looking at like 12 omelets worth that you can get from one ostrich egg. So, great question.
We got some from Facebook here. How fast do ostriches run?
Yeah, ostriches are the fastest running bird too, if I'm not mistaken, at about 70 kilometers per hour. You know, cheetahs, they're really fast, 110 kilometers per hour, fastest animals on land, right? But I mean, ostriches are pretty darn fast, and that's because they have these big, strong legs and those specialized feet for helping them run, right? So that is the #1 way they get away from the predators, so it helps them to be very, very fast runners. So about 70 kilometers per hour.
Awesome. And this one comes from Aaron. Aaron asks, how long are the neck?
How long are their necks? That is a great question. So I've actually never measured their neck, but we can kind of see it here as we get closer. Maybe what I'll do is I'll stand next to it, and you can use me as a measurement. So I'm about a little more than 6 feet tall. So you can see this right here. You'll probably be looking at about 1.5 meters, so about 3 feet long for a neck, right? And that's because they have those big, long legs. They have to have a big, long neck to be able to reach the food down on the ground that they're eating, right? And the other thing that's interesting about that is, remember, we talked about the giraffe neck with only 7 bones, same number of bones we had. The ostrich has about twice that many bones in their neck, which means twice as many bones means twice as many joints, which means twice as bendy. So that's why you can see birds doing all kinds of weird things with their necks and bending them in weird ways that you'd never be able to see a giraffe do. Great question.
Evelyn, who's 6 years old, asks, how big are their hearts?
Ostriches? Their hearts aren't that, they'd be about fist size, so probably about the same size as our heart. It's nothing compared to like the giraffe heart, that is kind of over yonder, which is about the size of a rugby ball, if you're seeing that there. But I mean, the giraffes, or excuse me, the ostriches, I mean, they have a pretty big heart, but bird hearts work in a different way than mammal hearts actually do, because birds have a different lung system and all that kind of stuff too. But their lung, yeah, their heart would be about like the size of a fist or what have you. So yeah, good question. Oh, you guys are asking good ones. I like it.
How long do they carry their eggs for? And someone's Chicky 1980 says, can ostriches move their eyes?
Ah, great question. So in terms of how long do they carry eggs, birds in general, they don't carry their eggs for very long, right? Because when they're developing in their reproductive tract, they want to basically get them out as fast as possible. And that's how birds basically protect themselves. Because especially if you're a flying bird, you don't want to be carrying around extra weight when you're flying up in the air. But I mean, ostriches, like we said, they came from flying birds, right? So they still retain those eggs. So they'll drop them on the ground pretty quick. So as soon as they're developed and ready to go, they don't carry them around like we would with a baby or anything like that. They're pretty much, as soon as those eggs are fully formed, they're out. And what's interesting is it'll be a multi-female egg nest, and the most dominant female will lay her eggs in the middle, and the more subordinate females will lay hers on the outside, because those are the more likely ones to be eaten by all the animals in Africa that want to eat them. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the second question.
Can they move their eyes?
Can they move their eyes? That's a great question. Thank you. So with birds, you often look at them like when you see birds moving around, they'll be like this, looking at you, right? And that's because their eye shape is actually different than ours. We have nice round eyes that we can use to look around, and we have those muscles around that can help us look around with just our eyes. Birds have a little bit different. Their eyes can actually be a little bit more oblong shape, which means they don't really move their eyes, right? They also have a ring of bone around their eyes. It makes it pretty hard for them to move. So that's why when you look at birds and they're doing like this to like look, that's why they're looking at you that way, is because they can't move their eyes as well as we can in the sock, and that includes ostriches. So yeah, good question.
Zack, we also have a question here. Do ostriches really bury their head in sand?
Aha, that's a great question. I was hoping we would get asked. And the answer is that would probably not be the best way to survive a lion chasing you in the savannah, right? So it's a myth that used to happen. So when people kind of first, European explorers started visiting Africa, they saw, ostriches, these big, crazy-looking birds, and they would kind of see them hunker down and put like what it looked like was putting their head in the sand. But as I said, if you're trying to hide from an animal like a lion, which is this top predator, that's pretty not a good way to really hide yourself if you're just standing and you're that big. So what they do, and what they think the behavior that might have created that myth is sometimes, I mentioned how fast ostriches run and how good runners they are, but they're also pretty good at hiding too. So what they'll actually do when they're scared and try to hide is, as big as they are, they'll actually hunker down and they'll put their neck kind of flat on the ground, which might look a little bit like they're burying it in the sand. And that when they're doing that, they're actually looking somewhat like, a bush or something that you would find in the savannah, just in the grassy field. So it's actually a pretty decent way of camouflaging. I know it sounds kind of weird, and that's where they think that the myth of ostriches burying their head in the sand would have come from. So that's a great question. Do we have any other questions about ostriches?
I have another one on Instagram.
Excellent.
What do they eat?
Ostriches, the first answer that came to my mind was pretty much anything that fits in their mouth. But more specifically, they'll eat grass, they'll eat plant material, they'll eat seeds, they'll eat a lot of this plant material that they can find on the ground. So kind of think of like a chicken, a really, really big chicken, just kind of hunting and pecking stuff. That's similar to what these guys will do. But what's important to note is it's not just plant material. Ostriches are omnivores, which means they eat plants and meat. So they'll eat things like insects, lizards, snakes, small mammals. So little things they find on the ground and can fit them back in their mouth and chuck them back, they'll do it. So ostriches are certainly not super picky. All right, we have time for one more ostrich question.
This one comes from Isabella, age 6. Why can't ostriches fly?
That's a great question. So why can't ostriches fly? So there's a few different types of birds that can't fly. I mean, ostriches are famous. We have emus, cassowaries, of course, penguins, kiwi birds, many birds that live on islands. So flying takes a lot of energy. That's a lot of muscles that you need to be able to flap. And as I mentioned with things like the eggs, there's trade-offs. So if you want to be able to fly, you have to keep your body weight really low, right? You have to have all these muscles going into flying. So for ostriches, they grew to this size where they didn't need to fly anymore. So they can run fast. They live in a place where they didn't necessarily need to spend all that energy flying, right? So basically they just lost that ability and used that energy elsewhere. Maybe their legs, right, to grow those muscles bigger and things like that. And the same kind of thing happened with a lot of birds that live on islands and unfortunately had gone extinct due to, people would arrive there, bring with them predators that weren't on those islands before, and the birds couldn't fly away to get from them. That's a classic story of the dodo, if you're familiar with that. So yeah, it's a really great question. So we're gonna mosey on to our next stop here, and we'll get to do a little bit of walking and checking out a safe personal distance, the Body Worlds exhibit as we walk through. So you can see some various different parts of digestive systems, and of course here we have a sheep, a somewhat close relative of the giraffe. And as we walk through, you'll see a big cat. This is a slice through a lion. And one of my favorite facts about cats, whether it's a lion, snow leopard, cheetah, house cat, Sprinkles, or whatever your cat's name is, they do things actually in very similar ways, right? Like their retractable claws and their big sharp teeth and their hunting. Cats are very, very similar, whether it's a teeny little house cat or a big lion or a tiger, right? It's just a matter of size, but they're pretty similar by and large. So as we kind of come around the corner here, you can see we're kind of in the ocean area, and this right here is a mako shark. And the reason I know that is because it was on the side. So the mako sharks are actually the fastest swimming type of shark in the world. They can reach speeds of up to 80 kilometers per hour. It's like a burst. They can swim constantly. So 80 kilometers, it's about as fast as you should be driving down Crowchild Trail. But normally they'll swim at speeds up for a consistent amount of time, like 50 kilometers per hour, which is about as fast as you should be driving past your house. Now, I can also tell you this shark here is a male. And how do I know that it is a male shark? Well, if you look at the back fins underneath it, those are the pelvic fins, there's those kind of extensions coming off of them. Those are called claspers. And males will use that to help them mate. Females wouldn't have that at all. So that is an example there. Now, do we have any questions about sharks in our feed?
We do have some. This one says, can sharks really smell a drop of blood from miles away?
Well, I can tell you, if you look at the shark's nose there, I'll get out of the way if you want to take a closer look. They have an amazingly powerful sense of smell. And as smell particles, so the way smell works is it's little tiny particles that float through the air and they get picked up by our nose. But those particles actually travel better through water. So especially if it's a liquid like blood, can they smell that far? Maybe not. That's a little bit of a stretch, right? But sharks certainly do have a really, really, really good sense of smell. One thing is one drop of blood in the water. If you get a paper cut and you're out swimming in like the beaches in Mexico, I don't think you have to worry about a shark. But the reality is they do have a very good sense of smell. They are potentially dangerous, but your chances of having anything really bad happen are pretty low.
Do all sharks eat meat?
So that is an interesting question because, of course, we see sharks. They got these big, sharp teeth. Is it a trick question? No, that's not a trick question. So sharks pretty much all meat. So there's different kinds of meat that they would eat. Maybe fish. Many types of them will hunt fish. Some of the really big ones, like great white sharks, they'll hunt seals and sea lions. Hammerhead sharks like to go after different types of rays and things like on my shirt. And some of them, like tiger sharks, will actually hunt sea turtles. Some small ones will hunt all kinds of things, like little shrimp. The biggest shark in the world, the whale shark, actually eats some of the tiniest food, plankton and krill. And they just swim with their mouth open and just collect it. And one of the really interesting sharks that has a really interesting diet is called the cookie cutter shark. And if you get the chance after our talk to Google it and check it out, they look like these tiny little sharks that have these weird mouths. And basically they take chunks out of like whales and other big animals that live in the ocean. And it looks like a cookie cutter has gone boom and punched out a bunch of their skin and fat, and that's what they eat. So those are cookie cutter sharks. They're super weird. But yes, Sharks are meat eaters.
We have another question here. Do sharks have bones?
Sharks do not have any bones in their body. And you might think to yourself, well, what about their teeth? Those look pretty sharp. Their teeth are very, very hard, for sure. But they don't have bones the same way we do have bones. Their body is made of cartilage. So the same stuff that your nose and your ears would be made of. I mean, those are obviously pretty wiggly. A good amount of cartilage can be pretty sturdy. We have cartilage like in our knees that helps them to stay nice and sturdy, right? And their whole body is cartilage, right? And that's what helps to hold them all together. So the teeth are quite a bit harder, and their teeth are, you can kind of see them growing in, and they grow and they push out the old ones, and that's why their teeth are everywhere. They're constantly replacing the teeth that they're growing, but that's why the only fossils really that we have of sharks are their teeth, because they don't have any bones that would traditionally fossilize.
Here's another question. Do sharks have scales like other fish?
So I know if any of you have ever gone fishing, I'm sure that you've noticed, or even if you look at your goldfish and other fish that you have in your fish tanks at home, they're covered with those scales that help protect their body. And of course the scales are where colors would kind of come in and things like that. So they don't, sharks don't have that. Like obviously this one doesn't have all of its skin on, but the skin that it does have, it almost looks like sandpaper. If you ever get the chance to feel a shark, I don't recommend it, but in safe environments where they can tell you can do it, I mean, like I said, not all sharks are dangerous to humans, right? So if it's a place where you are able to do that and you feel a shark, their skin feels very sandpapery. And the reason for that is because they actually have little tiny teeth growing out of their skin. The sciencey word, if you want, is called a dermal denticle. And it's basically the exact same shape and form as like a tooth, just much smaller. And it actually helps them when they're swimming to create currents around them to kind of help speed them up. So sharks actually feel that way, and people have actually in the past used shark skin as a type of sandpaper before we had sandpaper. So it's a pretty interesting little thing. Yeah, do we have another question about sharks at all? No? All right, so we are going to give you guys a little bit of a bonus, which is pretty exciting. So we have a little bit of extra time. So we are going to go to another stop in the tour that we didn't initially advertise. Ooh. We're going to go and check out our Bactrian camels and talk a little bit about camels. So if you have camel questions, keep them coming. We want to hear everything you want to know about camels, and they are weird, and they're one of my favorite animals to talk about. So this right here is an oryx. So remember we were talking a little bit about horns. This is a type of antelope, and you can really see its horns there. So that would be that keratin cover, a little bit of bone underneath that. So that's a really good example of an animal. And we got our human, of course, skeleton right there. And as we come a little bit further, this is a goat. And the goat, it's a good opportunity to see, again, that keratin horn. So goats and oryx are obviously pretty closely related, right? So they both have that bone inside and the keratin that grows on top of it. And one thing that's a little bit different as we come along a little bit further is if you look on the head of our caribou, and caribou are also one of my favorite animals to talk about. So if you guys have questions about caribou, or they're also known as reindeer, if you have questions about those, by all means, as we're talking about camels and stuff, you can definitely fire in those questions. But they have antlers on their head, which are different, again, from horns and the ossicones that we saw in the giraffe. So these ones typically are bigger in males. In fact, most species of deers, only males have them. Reindeer are the only ones that females have antlers as well. And antlers are solid bone. They actually fall off and regrow every single year, which is pretty crazy. Some of the fastest growing tissue in the world. And as we get to over here, we have our camels, so our Bactrian camels. There are two types of camels in the world. Bactrian camels are the two-humped type of camels. There's also one-humped camels, so those are dromedaries, and they are the ones that you'd see in like Africa. These would be like the Asian camels, and the easy way to remember that, if you want a cheesy, easy way of remembering which camel is which, Bactrian camel starts with B. If you turn a B sideways, it has two humps. dromedary starts with D, turn it sideways, has 1 hump. So there you go, fun facts. So, does anybody have questions about camels, or actually about any animal here in Body Worlds?
Why do camels have humps?
So camels have humps. A lot of people used to think that they were for water, for kind of storing water, but not really for storing water traditionally. If you poke a hump, it's not going to start leaking. It's fat is actually the main thing that they store in their humps, and what that is basically it's like a food reserve, right? So camels live in a place where there's not a lot of food, there's not a lot of water, so they can use fat to basically store those nutrients that they need to be able to survive in this harsh climate. And if they're getting less and less fat, they may end up being a little floppy, but it's a great way for them to protect them. Now, if you see the baby camel, you'll see its humps are quite a bit smaller. Obviously, baby animals tend to have less fat reserves, right? So it makes perfect sense. So they'll have smaller humps, and they have to kind of grow into them. So there's no bone in them, so if ever you see a camel skeleton, they will not have humps the same way that you would see in their bones. So, good question.
How do camels protect themselves from sand in the desert?
So, sand is obviously a pretty dangerous thing for camels. The deserts are really hot. So sand in particular blows, it gets everywhere. If any of you have ever been to a beach and done a face plant in the sand or anything like that, it can be pretty not fun, right, to get a bunch of sand in your face. So what camels do is they actually have on their face a bunch of really interesting features. So I'll get out of the way so you can see their face, but like their eyes have these crazy long eyelashes, right? They actually have a double layer of eyelashes to help protect their eyes from the sand blowing and all that. The other thing that's interesting is their nostrils actually can close, right? So if they're in something like a sandstorm, they can close off their nostrils so that sand isn't blowing into their nose. So it's another little trick that they have. And one thing that's really interesting, especially about Bactrian camels and living in a sandy, hot place, the desert they live in isn't always hot. They live in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, naturally, and that desert can actually get really cold in the wintertime. So in the summer, they'll be they'll actually be like pretty much hairless to be able to keep cool in the hot weather. And then come wintertime, they get really fluffy and poofy and basically grow their own winter coat every single year. So they go through this crazy amount of temperature variation. So I think we have time for one more question about camels or other animals here at Body Worlds.
All right, so we've got one here from Gary. How long can a camel go without water?
So camels are these amazing desert survivors, right? And they can go weeks, and some will even say months, without drinking water, right? And that's because camels are so good at getting water from the food, the little bits of plants that they find, and whatnot. They also have this amazing ability to not use any water if they don't need to. So like their pee is really, really thick, and like a sciencey word would be viscous. So it's almost like a gel coming out. That's kind of gross. Their poop is really, really dry, and there's almost no water in it. Even their saliva, so their spit, when they go down to bite like a plant and eat it, their lips are so good at grabbing things. So remember when we talked about giraffes, we talked about their tongue being prehensile, working like your hand. These lips kind of work the same way. They can grab onto things so that they don't actually have to get any saliva and even waste that tiny little bit of water. But when they do find water, they can drink a lot, and like more than 35 liters in one sitting, which is pretty amazing. That's like more gas than you can fit in a car. So pretty impressive animals. So do we have any more questions about camels? No, we're good? Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us on our Facebook Live event. I know we may not have gotten the chance to answer everyone's questions about all the animals. So please do, if you have a burning question that you want to know, send it in. We're also doing a new thing that we're calling the Wonder Bucket. So if you want to have a wonder question that you would like Spark and our scientists here to answer for you, send it in. Take a video and ask us an I wonder question in that video. Submit it on our social media, Facebook, and we're going to give you a video answer back. So that is our Wonder Bucket to check out. But also keep an eye on our social media platforms, our YouTube channel. We're going to be posting stuff all the time. We're looking at new exciting things that we can continue to keep all of you engaged in science and science communication. So thank you all again. I hope you enjoyed, and we're looking forward to connecting with you more. So stay safe and healthy out there, everybody.